Hi readers, Lee here. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to Thoughts on Books. And today I will be sharing my thoughts on Send Me, The True Story of a Mother at War by Marty Scovelin Jr. and Joe Kent. But first, I want to start by telling you a story. I've shared this story before on my channel months ago, but it's appropriate here. When I was in college, I was in ROTC and in the Louisiana National Guard. And in 1996, my grandfather passed away. Now, in my family, we typically have the viewing and visitation the night before the funeral. And it must have been a Saturday night because I had drill that day. And I showed up to the viewing, which was like an hour away from my unit, maybe 45 minutes. And as I don't remember what exactly I was doing, but an older man came up to me and looked at me, glared at me, and said, "I don't think women should be in the military." I was really shy back then. I'm not shy anymore like that. But I was really taken aback because this was completely inappropriate. A, my grandfather had just fucking died, and B, who does that at a viewing? Or at a funeral. I mean, for crying out loud. Anywho, I've obviously never forgotten that. Fast forward a couple years, and my sister gave me a copy of the book, A Woman of No Importance, by Sonia Purcell, about Virginia Hall, who is a legend, and they have, allegedly, a memorial to her in the CIA museum, which the public can't go to, but I would love to be able to get in to see that. And I read what Virginia Hall did with one leg and a wooden prosthesis. Back in World War II, she led, in addition to everything else that she did, she led downed airmen over the Pyrenees in all sorts of conditions, again with one leg. And you know what? I bet physically that fucker at the funeral wouldn't have been able to do that. I've never forgotten it. And when I read that about Virginia Hall, I was just furious, and I would love to go back and give that man a piece of my mind, because women have always participated in wars, whether in the military or not, and it is really, his opinion is worthless. But I'd also like to share with you something that I read on Twitter this morning, and it just goes to show nothing's changed. I'm not going to share who wrote this, but it is a female, looks like a service member. Came to a realization today, it doesn't matter what I do, someone will always have something to say. Even if I had deployed already, I would just hear, "I bet you never left the fob. I bet you never saw combat. You never fired your weapon." It will always be something. They lower the standards for women. They had to make different standards for the ACFT because all the failures were women. At Ranger School, they're more lax on the standards for women. 23 minutes for a 2-mile run? They let them have ponytails, in uniform, in my army. Women shouldn't be in combat MOS. They make men in combat situations weaker. They're just a distraction on the battlefield. They're a liability because they can get pregnant in lower readiness. It will always be something, so don't let them dull your shine, sunshine. You do what makes you happy, and let them live in their misery. And that brings me to my thoughts on Send Me, the true story of a mother at war. Lest you think that Shannon Kent did not have to go through the same things that other women in war have had to go through, let me share with you this part. This is following, and there's a larger point I want to make towards the end of this video, but this is following the suicide of an individual they both knew, she and her friend Brittany. Commander Price's death was the final straw in what they saw as a series of unaddressed issues. Brittany had already been sexually harassed and assaulted during that deployment, and Shannon had faced her share of harassment too. It wasn't all bad, but they were often treated very poorly. Shannon carried that weight with her. They considered themselves tough role models, and Shannon was fierce in that regard. "We need to make a pact to help people like us," Shannon said. ... They cried together and swore to help. Now, enough of my ranting about women in the military being treated differently or told they don't belong. I highly recommend this book because you will see that there is a space for women in the military, and Shannon was a fierce warrior. This book I found extremely accessible. It is written so well that a layman can easily follow what's going on. It's got a glossary in the back for all the acronyms, because you know the Army loves some acronyms. But one of my favorite things was that Shannon wanted and was trying to pursue her PhD in psychology, because she saw firsthand through Commander Price's suicide and through her own experiences that she tried to tamp down, the toll that war takes on men and women alike. There's a story in here that made me tear up about an encounter she had with an individual named James, probably not his real name, where he confesses to her that his depression is getting worse and worse. He'd had multiple deployments, and she intervened, and he ended up checking himself into a hospital to get treatment, and by the end of this is allegedly doing very well. But she wanted to help service members. We had 20 years of back-to-back deployments. Her husband in this book had 10 deployments by the time this book was over, at least as far as I counted. She had already had several herself. But that does take a toll on one's mental health. Again, even if you're not on a rampage about women in war like I am, this is a very good book. It talks a lot about the history of ISIS and how ISIS kind of became, and obviously, spoiler alert, Shannon did not survive. So what we see is less her perspective than more, I believe, her husband's perspective, or her husband's thoughts about her perspective. Obviously, she did not survive her final deployment. That is really not a spoiler. It's right in the blurb. But highly recommended it. I finished this in 2 days, and in fact, when I finished my last fiction book, I picked this up immediately to continue reading it, and I rarely read nonfiction at night. Excellent book. I'm going to check out Marty Skovlund Jr. I think he's the editor-in-chief, editor-in-chief of Task and Purpose, which is a military news and culture publication, former Army Ranger and experienced conflict reporter. And I'm going to see if he's got anything else out there, because I really found the writing accessible. If you know nothing about the military, you should be able to follow along. This is about really the Special Forces operation, or Special Forces, Special Operations side of things. Really, just really heartwarming. And even though I knew how it was going to end, I found myself crying at the end. And most of that was in the memorial part, where people talked about the impact she'd had on her life, on their lives, and her influence. James is one of the people, probably not his real name, who spoke at her memorial service or funeral. Really, really special book. Very glad I read it, and I highly recommend it. If you've read this, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If not, pick up a copy. Worth the read. That's all for me. Happy reading!